there. Welcome back to another episode of Shoulda Boosted. We're on episode 33, and today I don't actually have the other guys with me, but I have a special guest. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It is going great today, Malorian. I'm just finished some Warmachine in the garage and enjoying life tonight.
Yeah, I had my own Warmachine, got to actually play some in-person stuff. I know whenever we talk about this on here that people get jealous of us because, in most places they can't even do that. But Segue, that's going to talk about the way that they could be playing, which is online with War Table. But before we get to that, for those who don't really know you, Chris, which would be, how do you not know Chris by now? Just you want to give us a quick little bio of who you are?
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of people who don't know who I am. Wouldn't say I'm that well known in the community, but I've been to a lot of tournaments, so I have met a huge amount of the community. Been playing Warmachine now for what would it be, almost 7 years, 6 or 7 years. Started when I moved into another town and was working up north in Alberta. And met a couple guys who were playing and just fell in love with it right away. Been playing ever since. So I'm sure I've met lots of you, but we're looking forward to meeting the rest of the community when we can get back to gaming in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess another piece of your resume that's going to be important going into what we're going to be talking about, just because we'll relate to that, is that you've been on the WTC. How many years now?
So I've been on the WTC for 3 years previous to now. I've been captain once of a team. That was last year. So that would be my WTC resume. In general, I've always kind of been sort of middle of the pack. My personal experience has been a consistent 3-3 record, which is not fantastic, but hopefully one of these years we'll break that.
Yeah, fair enough. So, obviously there's a big pandemic thing that's going on right now. So a lot of this in-person game is not happening. And of course, with that, the WTC this year just could not happen. The idea that during a pandemic, we get people together from all over the place would just be absolute madness. So it looked like it was just going to be a nothing for a year until all of a sudden the idea started getting around where like, hey, what about this VTC? We could use this War Table thing. But you're the pro at this, Chris. Do you want to tell us, one, what is the VTC, like the format and how it actually was going to be running? And then two, how did you actually get pulled into it?
Sure, yeah. So to your point, WTC really stretched it out as long as they could possibly go. They really looked at all the kind of the options around how they could host something in that space in a safe way. And it seemed like for a period of time that it might still happen, then it might not. And then obviously, like you said, it just became completely unreasonable to think it was going to happen in this current environment. So while they were looking at different options, Stephanie Barry of Knight's Machine fame really stepped up and provided a solution in this space where she mentioned it would be a really good idea to have this virtual team championship, which is the acronym for VTC. So that it was really hosted in the same way as the WTC, but it was all online through that the new War Table app there. So there was a call out to WTC team members to see who was interested, who wanted to participate, and they got kind of first shot at the application to be in the event. And then from there, they went and they extended it to further people who were interested. So how I got involved with it was my good friend Corey Doyle was on a WTC team, was planning to go. And for context, I was not actually planning to go to WTC at all this year. I have some personal milestones that I was looking towards that obviously cost a significant amount of money that were going to impact my ability to travel overseas. So was avoiding that at the time, but because obviously it wasn't happening, and Corey Doyle was looking for a couple of folks to be on his WTC team turned VTC team, he reached out to me to see if I could be on his team. And at the time, I was kind of, I'll be frank, like I was a little bit disenfranchised with the game. It was early pandemic. I wasn't playing a lot. It was I was a little bit disconnected from the community, and he convinced me to just play a couple games of Warmachine on the War Table app, get used to it again, really see how things were working with the new tool. And he convinced me to play a little bit of Mercs, so that got my energy level kind of back up. And soon enough, I was playing tons of War Table games, enjoying it, and then jumped right into, agreed to be on his VTC team for the year. And then once I was on his VTC team, things snowballed a little bit, mostly because he knows that I can do paperwork, and he convinced me to become captain of our VTC team.
Oh, he sneaked you.
He did, yeah. I mean, it's entirely based on paperwork. Every other decision was democratic, and we worked together to figure out what we were going to do in a lot of cases. But he knew that I would take the time to fill out the submissions for the rounds and things like that. So, yeah.
So one of the things I was wanting to get your take on going into this is it really feels like this would not have happened if it wasn't for War Table. That one of the biggest things that really developed during this pandemic is the switch over with this big new tool, War Table, where before we had to do Vassal. And I mean, Vassal worked, but I mean, it was a little bit more painful to use. Whereas the big thing between War Table is just user-friendly, and all the time doing upgrades. How much do you think that was a factor that, like if it hadn't been for War Table, do you think the same thing would have happened on Vassal?
I can't imagine so. To your point, War Table is just so user-friendly. And Vassal, like, all props to them. I've tried to play on that platform multiple times, and it was a little bit too onerous to try to get through. War Table, is super simple. You can open up a game really easy and get started right away. And to your point, they're updating all the time, right? They're taking the community feedback that they've heard, and they're building on that tool to make it better. And I think that that's also super appreciated by the community. So I would say it likely would not have happened without War Table being in place for it to be a good solution in that space.
Okay, yeah, I figured I just want to, good to confer with the person that was actually there. The next thing I was wanting to know is just kind of like, what were your thoughts going into this? Obviously going to a virtual team championship is a lot different than just being there in person. So what were some of your concerns and things you were thinking about just getting into the format? Like even before you pick a list, I mean, the fact of things like, I'm sure you're going to bring up like what time you're going to be playing and stuff like that. What were the big things you were worried about going into this?
Yeah, I think, time for one of them is definitely a big concern. When you're at the WTC, for example, like you have the opportunity to kind of acclimate to the current time zone. But for us, virtual, obviously not an option. I was fortunate that, I have a extremely forgiving partner. And she allowed me to be up at 3:00 in the morning to play War Table games, and then play until noon or whatever the time was by the time we finished. And even though sometimes you're talking to an opponent and you're only a couple rooms away from where she's sleeping, she was very accommodating in that space. But I know a lot of people didn't do it because of the time difference, particularly in North It was too big of a shift for them, which totally makes sense. The other thing, initial thoughts on the format, like, or initial, I guess, concerns on the format was, because it is a remote or online app, a lot of people maybe didn't necessarily have the same experience with it that they would in a personal game, like an in-person game. And that's personal preference as well, right? Everyone enjoys their Warmachine in different ways. And, for some people, they don't like the 2D aspect of playing on War Table. I get that. I like it. I think it's a fantastic solution for currently what is an unfortunate circumstance in COVID-19. It's the tool itself is never going to replace in-person gaming, but it's the best option we have at the moment. So why not take it full advantage of it?
All right. So I guess the next step is, I mean, like going into this, what list did you decide to take and why?
So as I mentioned before, Corey had kind of convinced me to play a couple of rounds of some Merc casters. Specifically, he had actually won a NorCal War Table tournament using Thexus. And I've always loved Thexus. Like, he's just this weird caster that does weird things. And, you can remember, we've played lots of in-person games where you've played Thexus into me and just, hammered me. So I also have a little bit of begrudging feelings there of always getting beaten by Thexus. So, I have an army downstairs in my house with all set up for Thexus, and I was excited about the opportunity of playing him again. And then when I saw Corey playing him and doing well with him with some of the new pieces available, I was convinced to try him out. So I took a Thexus and Ashland pairing to this after playing a few games convinced by Corey, and then playing in a couple of tournaments outside of this with Thexus, and then Ashland was kind of just a potential solution for some problems Thexus may have that I actually didn't ever see or really feel were problems after a while. It may convince me to take her out of the pair, but that's where I landed. Yeah, Thexus, Ashland, and Mercs.
So what were the actual lists?
So my Thexus list had obviously Thexus and three wardens. I can't remember which one is which ever, but it's the heavy jack with the two claws and the helmet. Then I took Stygius as the attachment. I took a full unit of Crow's Cutthroats with the Cephalix Dominator, making sure he's keeping them in line, as well as Iona and Holt with another Dominator. I took Gatsby because he's fantastic in the current environment and is allowed in operating theater. And with him, I took a Helldiver, which is a weird choice, I think, and a Stalker. And then on top of that, I took 2 Void Archons, 2 Pistol Wraiths, and a couple of Agitators. In the Ashland list, I had Ashland, obviously, a Blockader in her battle group. Took 2 units of Gun Mages, not the Thorn ones, just the Signar Gun Mages with their UA. Tempest. Exactly, yeah. And then 4 Archons. So I took 2 Thamurite Archons and 2 Morrowind Archons. So the intention there was to be able to apply the Sniper from the Gun Mages. And what I was concerned with the Thexus list was potentially like a lot of single wound infantry that hit incredibly hard. Things like Vlad 2 Doom Reavers, where I might be able to use Ashland to shoot a bunch of those models down from a decent distance, and then apply a Blockader once most of those models were dead. So.
Yeah, and the triple warden is interesting. I'd seen stuff like that done with Siphon, where of course with the feat you can actually hit that hard. But I guess now that really Cephalix have changed. Now they can take things like the Void Archon and Gatsby. Now you can get that extra damage buff that between that and the Agitator getting +4 damage means that your regular 10-point warden can actually do a lot of work, even though it's normally a lower POW.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of the list that I have is Iona and Holt, as I mentioned. So it's a +6 swing potentially. So those wardens go from 14 to POW and strength 20 in some cases, which is I haven't had a lot of issues taking out high armor pieces. I mean, if something's at like arm 23 or something, maybe I'll have an issue with it, but those circumstances are so few and far between in the game.
Now that we have your list, I mean, one of the things I'm interested to know is that for a regular WTC, there's a lot of team tactics and ideas of like, okay, if we see this, we'll drop this first. I'm going to take this so I can cover this pairing. You need to be able to cover this. How much of that came into the VTC? Was it exactly the same, or did you find it was kind of different in this case?
I'm sure every team was a little bit different in this space, but I would say for our team, the way I felt was it was significantly less onerous in terms of the management that we put into the team composition and the preparing for matchups than we would have in the regular WTC. We did talk about it a little bit. We talked about what people were comfortable with, what we should look at in terms of matches. But generally for a WTC, we would break down, all of the matches you might see, all the teams that were out there, who's good into what, do a bit of a matchup spreadsheet for each. That was not as much the case with the VTC. As a team, we were really looking forward to more so just really enjoying ourselves, really just trying to take a little bit more of a laid back approach to it than I have in years past at the WTC. That said, we ended up having 3 Mercs players on our team because we thought it might be kind of an interesting advantage to be able to apply a faction that's so kind of flexible, a faction that has so many different options to them, and see what choices people would make on the other side of the table because of the 3 options available there. Now, each of our lists are obviously significantly different. We ended up with, like I said myself, I played Thexus and Ashland. We had a Aurora one, Fiona pair, and then we had an Osram and what the heck did he play? I think was it a Bart pair? So like wildly different lists within the same faction. Sorry, it was Osram Magnus too. So wildly different casters, wildly different options within the same theme. So it provided some weird questions, I guess, for our opponents at times.
Yeah, definitely. We're not going to get into it in this one here, but there was definitely a lot of mercenaries at the VTC. In fact, our next episode is going to be talking about is maybe mercenaries overpowered right now, but there's a little spoiler for all of our listeners. But I guess going into it now, round 1, who'd you get paired up against and what happened?
So round 1, they did it a little bit different than the rest of the tournament where we played in person or at least all at the same time types of games. For round 1, what they did was they separated it over the course of a week so that you could play games kind of at any time as we led up to the weekend of the VTC. We got Canada Beaver played Germany. I believe their team name was Germany Goes Digital, but I've seen a couple different names of the team in a few places. And I ended up playing a guy with the tag name Wutini. I think his actual name is Dan, but I could be wrong there. And we played on Invasion. So that was a very interesting match. He played Azello in Will Work for Food, which is a terrifying matchup for Thexus, who I played. Just with the extended threat range from Azello and the ability for him to just jump in and potentially try to kill your caster, it was a very interesting and kind of cagey game as we stepped into it. A bit awkward in that Azello kind of came up the board and he was able to pick up a couple of pieces that I wasn't expecting him to pick, but then I feel personally he feeded maybe a bit too early, or maybe that he was a bit too spread out in his feet, because what I was able to do is I was able to counter feat with Thexus and pull a couple of the important models. I think there was a Void Archon and a couple of Primal Archons ended up getting TK'd out of Azello's feet. And Azello's feet is a pulse. It's it is an aura, not a pulse. Other way around there. So once they're outside of the feet, they no longer gain the armor bonus, and they were able to go down fairly quickly from that. Now, it was still a very tight game up until the end. I think it was very close in terms of CPs, and there was only maybe a handful of models on both sides of the board at the end of the game. So maybe I was able to turn that advantage into a slight win. We had kind of changed positions on the board, so he was out on the right, and I was trying to contest it with some incorporeal models like the Pistol Wraith, and he was chasing them down with things like a remaining Primal Archon. And on the left side of the board, I had kind of contained and held that, and we were kind of trading a couple points turn over turn. but I was a couple ahead, so he had to make a play, and unfortunately, he ran out of time in that scenario. So it was a very close game, very tight. We ended up winning the round 4-1, which was a huge thing over Germany. Germany's always a solid team. These guys were incredibly good, and they actually clawed their way back a decent amount in the tournament itself. So fantastic to see these guys do well, and it was a great game.
So just some questions around the way that the round actually went. You had already mentioned time. How much clock did they actually give you, and how stressful did you find it compared to a regular game?
Yeah, so they gave us 75 minutes per person on clock without setting up on the clock. So you set up before the game, make all your deployments, and then you'd start the clock. It was a little bit different than the 90-minute standard introduced by the Warmachine weekend folks, which was a little bit more stressful to get used to as we first got into the tournament. But it worked out fairly well. I think for players who have been on War Table a decent amount of time, and players who are comfortable with the game in general, the 75-minute time actually worked out quite decently. Now, there were a lot of games that were very close on clock at the end, but most of them were in and around the 6 or 7 turn marker, so they probably would have been close if they were at 90 minutes too, because people would just end up using that extra time thinking or doing other things.
Okay, fair enough. I guess maybe just on that too, just kind of with thoughts of like, did people actually take smaller model count armies to try and help them with that clock, or not really?
I don't think so. People still really brought what was going to be most powerful for the meta. I think if people were considering it more, and maybe other teams had, but we had talked about this as a team afterwards, a list like an old Stalingrad or something like that, something where it can really eat up your opponent's clock, might have actually been a really significant advantage in this format, because there were a lot of really, like I said, really close games that came down to the wire on clock, and to force your opponent to try and chew through that many models might have actually been a decent advantage in this format.
Okay. Yeah, I know, like you had mentioned that Corey Doyle had been in that NorCal War Table event, and I had taken Striker 2 with 3 units of Legion of Lost Souls, and that was a mistake. That takes a lot of time to do all those little movements and shield walls and stuff like that. But maybe another question just on the way that how like the team works. So normally if you were in the WTC, the team would be there. You can look across. You can see how the other games are going. Did you get that real team feel from these VTC games as well?
I wouldn't say you got as much of the feeling of like the team competition. I would say like you never really had a lot of opportunities where you're, to your point at the WTC, like standing across from another team and maybe, throwing some cracks their way or having some jokes, things like that. That didn't really occur too much, but there was lots of opportunity for that kind of community building in other ways, through the forums that we were using or the Discord chats we were using. Generally the way it worked for, round setup and things like that is myself as the captain, I'd go have a conversation with the opposing captain, and then I would come back to my team and let them know what decisions were made, or we would put it in the chat and we would just kind of work back and forth that way. So it was a little bit unfortunate that there wasn't that same communal opportunity to, again, have a conversation face to face with another team. But again, we're all in the same situation, so we make the best of the cards we're dealt.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so round 1, Canada, Beaver doing great, Dancocks doing great. What happens in round 2?
So round 2, we get Wales, and I play a fellow by the name of Luke Waller. We played on King of the Hill, and he played Animag into me. I haven't seen Animag in a little while, so it was interesting to see Legion out in full force before the CID dropped. It was, fairly tight game. There were a couple of significant issues. Issues is not the right word. A couple of significant plays or misconceptions that maybe my opponent had on what was going to happen to his models, where he placed them. For example, his belief was that when I was going to feat with Thexus, everything was going to be pushed in one direction, similar to like how a Colgrima feats, or similar to how like a Gordon feats, which is obviously not the case. But it was kind of in the back of his mind for his thinking process. Totally unfortunate, but what it did end up costing him was GoLab. He had put kind of GoLab in behind a building, hoping that the defense was going to protect it long enough. And unfortunately, because of the feat, I was able to kind of pull GoLab around the building and then Rampager it up into my force, where I was able to basically pick it up for free. So there was a couple quick and easy trades like that in the early game, and what happened was between my feet and between a couple TKs, I was able to get up a couple of points quite early, and then I was able to close it out with a quick circle of the central flag. And even though Animag feeded and came into me, she wasn't able to break through with enough models to contest both the flag and the circle. And I was able to TK a couple of key models out, kill the couple of models I needed to, and score 2 more points to close out the game. Now, what enabled that was, unfortunately, because I had pushed kind of so hard into Animag and basically gave up a ton of models to do so, the Blightbringer had not moved forward into the zone. If the Blightbringer was in the zone, obviously I can't score it because there's no way I can get that model out, and the game probably goes maybe a different way. But I was fortunate that wasn't the case, so I was able to pull down that game quite quickly. I think it was turn 3 or maybe turn 4 in the scoring. But unfortunately, I was the only member of my team to win that round. So we went 1-4 that round.
Whoa, Wales coming up with the big upset here.
Yeah, Wales, they were a very good team. They were very solid. I think they did really well the rest of the tournament as well. So yeah, I wouldn't even call it an upset. They just played really well.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, all right. So maybe something before we go to round 3. You talked about how there's kind of like a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation. I know in the games that I've played on War Tables, some of the misinterpretations that I've had is around terrain, where, say, for example, I see something and it looks like acid, but then when we're partway through the game, it turns out it's supposed to be like an acid cloud, or, like for me, a trench, the whole box we just treat as a trench, but we're partway through the game and I'm playing with somebody across from another part of the world, and they say, no, if you're only in the actual like trench within the thing, like the actual picture. Did you have any terrain type issues during this?
The good news was, most of the players there had played on War Table for a decent amount of time already. No one was completely new to the tool, or at least they were familiar with most of the terrain that was already available within the package, and had a concept as to what things should or should not be. But B, the event organizers put together a fairly comprehensive players package. So if there were any questions or concerns like that, for the most part, the players could look at the beginning of the game and say, oh, look, this is what, this rock says it is in the players pack. So we can both agree before things get started that this is absolutely what a piece of scenery should be.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and I know they even made like special terrain just for the VTC. So that was amazing. Like they had some pretty standard terrain, and then they released the new stuff for the VTC, where it's like, that amazing looking beach and stuff like that. And, the problem is that sometimes the stuff that looks amazing can also be a little bit tougher to tell, but that's great. If they give you a primer to know what things are, that makes it very simple and straightforward.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the only issue I have with the VTC terrain packs is that they're actually so nice looking, and they're so integrated. I would say they kind of blend together almost a little bit. So it's nice that they have the lines around pieces of terrain or pieces of the zones. It's really cool at the WTC to see thematic tables that look like the scenery elements and the zone elements are part of the table. But in the virtual format, it makes it a little bit hard to actually see sometimes, right? You see a wall, but maybe you don't actually see it because it kind of blends into the rubble that's beneath it. Or, you're playing on the beach table that they had available, and the right side of the board is, it's the water. Yeah. And you're like, well, is this actually terrain, or is this just part of the board, right? And I think everyone obviously, recognizes it's just thematic. It's just there for looks. But sometimes it does make things a little bit more confusing.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. So right now, Canada 1-1. What happens in round 3?
So round 3, we played a team called Power Fist, which my assumption is that they are one of the English teams. At least the people I spoke to were all English. So if anyone is not English on the team, I apologize. If you want to send me a mean message, that's also fine. I played a fellow by the name of Chris, so that was easy to remember at least. And we played Thexus into Raven. He played Rhett. So that was interesting matchup. I felt in a fairly confident position coming into it for 2 main reasons. Number one being I played a very similar Raven list previous in the week, just in another tournament I was a part of, and I had found there's some control issues in that list in particular. Not a huge amount of ability to contest and score against Thexus. And specifically, we were playing on bunkers. So obviously, that's a significant problem. The other part of the solution in my mind was we had chosen tables. So maybe we can do a bit of a breakdown on the selection between tables and matchups if you'd like.
Sure.
But effectively, I got to pick the table we were on. And there was a table with a significant amount of walls and buildings that I knew I could abuse. And when we saw it, we felt, okay, we want to put the ret player there. Whomever plays the ret player, we're going to put them on this table. So for context, to break it down, if you haven't been to the WTC, the way it works is they do a selection process between the teams to see who's going to match up into whom. And not to break down the whole system, but effectively one team gets to pick matchups where they'll select effectively 3 of the 5 matchups, and one team will get to pick tables. We felt it was critical, given the scenery we saw on the VTC tables, to pick the table selection, because at that point you can turn a matchup which is playable or maybe disadvantaged into a playable match or a advantaged match, depending on where you are in that spectrum. So, for example, like I said, we're playing Ret. This Ret army in particular had a Hyperion, 2 Tridents, and an AFG, so 4 large bases, and unfortunately got stuck on a table with 2 large buildings, one of them being quite central, and also a couple of long walls that were able to really mess up his movement around the board. So we played. It was a fairly quick game. I was able to go first. I got some models into some annoying positions. He was actually measuring a bit before the game to see, okay, so my Trident can run past this wall and be on the other side on the first turn. And I was noticing this, and not that it's like any supreme bit of tactical genius, but I put a stalker there. I was okay. Like, you don't have access to your objective yet. You can't shoot me except with AoEs, so I'm going to put a stalker there, and we're going to go from there. So I felt like he was really hamstrung by his ability to move around the board, and when it came to his second turn, he was kind of looking for a way to attrition, a way to get back into control, and I had effectively just thrown as many crows, cutthroats as I could into his zone. I had brought up the Helldiver in his zone, even though it got me exactly 0, attrition value. But it was just things for him to deal with in his zone, in bunkers, so that he wasn't moving into the scenario elements in the middle of the board. He wasn't contesting into my zone. And unfortunately, We got about halfway through his turn. He had activated all of his big bases, and he realized, oh, crap, I'm going to just lose. Like I'm actually going to give you 2 points on the top of 2, which is my turn. Ooh. So in that case, Texas just effectively auto wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So it was a bit of an unfortunate situation, but yeah, that was the way that game played out.
How'd the team do?
That round, we did fairly well. I believe we went 5-0 that round.
Oh, sweep.
Yeah. So we were feeling a little bit bad coming out of that Wales game, and we were 5-0 to the final round. That was the second round of the first day of the weekend, the Saturday, and there were only 2 rounds per day, so we felt on a high coming out of that, which was nice. Nice way to end the day.
Maybe just talk about a little bit of tech there. I mean, you had talked about how you took the Helldiver and how that was kind of a weird choice on Gaspy, but I'm starting to see that more and more in the War Table tournaments that I'm playing in, and it's some pretty key tech because, I mean, not only does it mean you can put a model exactly where you need it to go and contest some scenario piece, but I mean, just having something up there that can knock something down, which really then just really sets you up for that, Texas assassination or anything else type of assassination. Like it's a really good piece to take with.
Oh, certainly. And particularly with Texas, you look at the 3-inch aura that it's able to come up and you can kind of play around that. But obviously Texas has so much movement shenanigans going on with his army that it can really start to abuse that further. So, it never came up at the VTC, but I've had plenty of games where an opponent has put his caster just outside of the, 3.5-inch threat range from the burrow marker, and all of a sudden I TK my Helldiver and he's in base to base with your caster and he's going to knock you down, right? Or I TK your caster and he knocks down your caster. So it is some interesting spicy tech there.
Not to mention the armor debuff as well at the same time.
Absolutely. I would say in 90% of the games I play with him, he's just a nice, like really far up the board Dark Shroud target. And maybe that's not worth it for 6 points, but oftentimes he just moves over, he applies Dark Shroud to somewhere that I can't get a running, Stalker or running Servitor, and he applies that debuff for me.
All right, so pregame done, day 1 done, moving on to day 2 with the round 4. So how'd that go down?
So what happened was they broke it down so that at the end of day 2, they were going to do a cut to the top 4, and then those top 4 would play for first place. But they did this because there were a couple of drops towards the end, and they wanted to make sure that the tournament still had all 5 rounds. So the way to accomplish this is to make a cut and add in a potential 2-1 like we were to the final kind of runnings for first place. At the end of day 1, at the end of the Saturday, there were only 2 undefeated teams remaining, and that was the other Canadian team, and Sweden Bop Bap, I believe is the name of the team. So they were the only 2-0s. Like I said, we were 2-1, and because of the way that the points work out, because of the way that they broke down the standings of their tournament, their first tiebreak is actually player wins, not strength of schedule, not control points or anything like that. It's the number of player wins you have on your team. And we had done okay in that regard outside of the 1-4, but we had a 5-0 on our record, and we had a 4-1 on our record. So we actually snuck into the top 4, I believe in 3rd place, which was pretty exciting for us. We weren't expecting that after we lost to Wales, but we snuck in, which was awesome to see. So when we showed up, or when we got the matchups for day 2, we were playing one of the undefeated teams in Sweden Bop Bap, which was terrifying because Sweden is a perennial, very good team. Played 2 of their teams at WTC last year. They're all solid players, so we knew we were in for a tough one for sure. I personally played into Robin Anderson, and we played on Recon 2, and he played Robin played Aurora 1, and it was, we know her threat ranges are insane. They go, basically across the board if they want to. So Thexus can do something similar. His threat ranges are okay. I played Thexus again. Spoiler alert, if I haven't mentioned it, I played Thexus all 5 games. So, very cagey game. Robin went for an early assassination run on Thexus. In my mind, probably would have had it if Aurora had fully committed and wanted to be up the board a little bit more to provide aura of power and allow one of the negation angels to boost to hit Thexus and paralyze him, but didn't want to fully commit to that yet. Obviously, there's a risk involved with that, so that makes sense. I was fortunate in that Robin missed the 6, I believe it is, that the negation angel needs to hit the Thexus, and I survived through that turn. So from that point on, we just got to piece trade a little bit. Aurora did not have a corollary in her army, so I was able to, and she was playing quite far back, so I was able to actually push a couple of models into significant spaces with the Thexus feat. For instance, the Toro was hanging out just at like 13 and a half inches from Aurora, and I was able to pull it outside of Aurora's control range and then give it a couple taps with a pistol wraith and make it stationary.
Ooh,
so
nice.
It was that was on a significant turn where it was in the left-hand zone on Recon 2. I was able to clear out the majority of that zone, move my forces into it, and although, obviously the Toro's still there, so I didn't score it, but there was no way he was going to save that Toro, which meant the following turn it was effectively just going to die. Now on the other side of the board, on the right side of the board, Robin was pushing very hard. I was able to just kind of pick up a couple of key pieces there, but it was really based on, okay, how much do I have to feed this zone to stay relevant here? How much, is he going to take from me every turn? So I was, avoiding that as much as I possibly could. I was fortunate that I had a pistol wraith over there, was able to avoid a fair amount of attacks because he didn't have a lot of magic weapons on that side of the board. So that helped me in that space. We played a little bit of back and forth, piece trading like that. We got to a point where I was effectively going to control the left-hand zone and start scoring significantly. And Robin was going to start to score the right-hand zone, but didn't get there quite yet. And at that point, because Robin had to go for a significant play, Robin lost on clock. So.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So when I came out of that round, because it went to clock and because we had played such a long game, I discovered that 2 of my other team members had won, and we went 3-2 against a very, very strong Sweden team, and we pushed into the finals.
Nice, and I assume that's going to mean it's an all-Canadian final, right?
I really wish. I really wish it meant it was an all-Canadian final. Unfortunately, even though Canada had beaten the North America team the night before, or I guess the morning before, because it's the weird time zones. All gas, no breaks, managed to beat the other Canadian team in the semifinals. So they were also a 2-1 team. So maximum chaos here. We had 2 2-1s playing for the final, and the undefeateds the day before had both been knocked out.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we're on to the big final. So how'd it go against all no breaks, all gas?
Yeah, no breaks, all gas. They were, very strong team. They had some unique tech within their lists. There was a Helga 1 player on their team with Brad. They had a Troll player with John Henry Jr. There's some weird lists there that were, really cool to see. I ended up playing to Rich Owens. We played on Spread the Net, and he played a Haley 3 list. Rich was basically up on attrition the whole game. I again played Texas, like I said. I was trying to work to keep relevant pieces in, significant places on the board. But every turn I lost a couple of key solos or some Crows Cutthroats or whatever. And it just felt like I was constantly losing pieces and not really gaining a whole lot back. Unfortunately, I personally had some poor plays that I saw, and it was not great on my behalf. There were a couple turns where I was thinking, okay, I'm going to score 3-4 points this turn, and I'm going to be so far up on scenario that it's gonna steamroll. Rich is going to have to go through for a significant play here, and when those came up, sometimes dice happen. I went for a play to move Haley 3, Haley Future in particular, out of the zone and score the center zone, and that didn't show up the way I needed it to. That happens. I went for a play where I was hoping on my feet turn I'd be able to push. There was a unit of Resolutes coming down the left-hand side, and I was going to push the Resolutes away, and then I was going to use a Dominator to move up, take control of Gate. What's the cavalry fella's name? In Flames.
Throne. Gabriel
Throne. Gabriel Throne. I was half right. And I was going to take control of him and walk him around one of the Resolutes who would still be contesting, and hope to kill that model with Gabriel Throne. And just because of the way TK worked out and my activations that turn, I kind of got halfway through my turn and then TK'd the wrong model and was like, oh shoot. Okay, no. Well, here we go. So, it wasn't, it was a fantastic game. There were some mistakes on my end that led to, me not being in a as commanding of a scenario position as I wanted to be. But all the power to Rich. He was taking significant pieces off the board every single turn and getting more and more up on attrition on me. So the good news is, now maybe this is because Rich had heard what had happened with the rest of his team and just stopped maybe concentrating, or maybe he was looking for a way to close out the game and just didn't find it. I kept myself relevant. I kept myself in scenario for long enough where I was able to get to a point where I was up slightly on clock in the last few minutes of the game, and Rich unfortunately clocked himself. So, to your point earlier, if clock was a big deal in this, say all the games went there, but 3 of my games did end by clock, even though there were lots of scenario points on the board.
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning that maybe he saw how the other teams had did, and unfortunately, this is the one where the Canada's going to fall, and the states are going to take it.
Absolutely, yeah. Like we ended up losing that round 3-2. It's quite close. Things were right down to the wire in a lot of cases. A couple dice rolls go one way or another, and we're up 3-2. But that's the way it lands. You play the game because it's a dice game, and there's sometimes you make decisions that don't work out, and that's where we were. So all the power to All Gas No Breaks. They had a fantastic tournament. Could not have asked for a better final opponent, except if it was the other Canadian team. But love those guys, appreciate the final game, and it was fantastic all the way through.
Nice. Yeah, and congratulations to both Canadian teams. I mean, obviously you both did very, very well, and like you said, congratulations to No Breaks All Gas. So yeah, great event. It's sad to hear that there were those drops. I mean, I'd like to hear that they'd want to stay in all the way through. One of the things I want to do at the very end here, though, is kind of get some final thoughts of the VTC and what the future might hold for it. Now, one of the things that I think is the biggest shining thing for the VTC is kind of like something that you'd already talked about, where if you are a person where there's a financial issue for 1 year because you're saving up for a big event or whatever's happening, hey, the VTC, as long as you own a computer and a mic, you're basically good to go. And so I really see this as something where it can open up to a lot of people that maybe normally couldn't play, where now, hey, if there's great people wherever, they can just play, and it's going to open things up. So I guess with that in mind, do you think the VTC is something that's going to have a future even in a non-pandemic world? Is it something you could see happening in addition to the WTC? Like maybe they're 6 months apart and they're going to be both happening? Or do you even envision a time where maybe this replaces the WTC? We're like, hey, how about we just all save thousands and thousands of dollars and we'll just spend that to see each other more at Warmachine weekend or one of the other events? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the points you make are super valid, right? It's definitely a cheaper alternative. It's definitely an easier way to connect with people for games. What it is missing that the WTC has is the community aspect of it. That standing across from your opponents, that getting to know people you have never met, getting to see old friends again that live on the other side of the world, that can never be replicated, unfortunately, right? And as much as we want to say this is all about the game and, we're all excited to play games, like it is, but it's also so much about the people that we know and the people we want to interact with. I love playing Warmachine, but if I wasn't playing Warmachine with the people that I probably wouldn't play the game, to be honest with you. So it can never replicate the community aspect. Now, is there a world in which they both happen? Maybe. Is there a world in which the VTC, builds into something more? Maybe. I would say that it felt to me like the organizers maybe weren't as enthused with it at the end of the day as they could have been. I think, it's a hard event to run. There are a lot of people, there are a lot of moving parts. And I personally want to say, like, a huge thank you to everyone who put any work into this space. Stephanie, Barry, the whole judge team, all of those folks were just on point and really, really responsive and really set it up to be a fantastic event. I feel like they were tired at the end of it, and maybe there were some disparaging comments. Maybe they're not as enthused to do it in another year. Who knows? But we'll see. I would like to see it happen again. Post pandemic or even in the if it's pandemic 2021, that's fine. Like I want to see this event happen again, regardless. Now, again, is it ever going to get up to WTC standards? Is it ever going to be at the number of teams WTC is? Probably not, but it's still a very good alternative in this space.
Now, I guess along with this too, like one of the things that was maybe hurting it were those 2 days where, especially if you're playing at a very off time, like you said, to get up super early in the morning. Do you think it would have helped if, instead of trying to compact it, if all the rounds went like the first round, where like most of the other war table tournaments, like, hey, look, this week you're up against this country and you guys can work together to figure things out. Do you think that'd be better to stretch this over 5 weeks, or do you think it's better to just squish it down into the one weekend, basically?
Frankly, I think it's better to just try and squish it down. Yeah, it's, a little bit easier to schedule if you spread it out over the course of the week. But for example, when we played Germany in that first kind of week time frame, my opponent was super flexible, super agile in helping us set up a time. But for us Canadian folks, like, we had the advantage of Labor Day weekend, right? We had the advantage of a day off in the middle of the week where we could play folks overseas. And that was really, from what I saw, if you didn't get it in on the weekend, that was really the only alternative to play a person. So, like, we got to a point where it was heading into the week and it was kind of either like, okay, we play today, or I literally need to play you at midnight, or you need to play me at 2 a.m, or whatever the case might be. So I don't think it's actually that big of an advantage to spread it out over the course of a week, because you're still going to end up playing the majority of those games on the 2 days that people have off on the weekend anyways.
Yeah, I was also thinking that the whole team portion might mess with that too, because I mean, if you're in this situation where it's over a week and you already know that your team or their team has already won 3 games, well, the other guys might just go and just like throw in the towel, right? So I think you might see a lot more 5-0s and 4-1s, and kind of take away from some of that the real enthusiasm for it. But another part I was wondering too, just kind of like maybe breaking this out, is that what does this mean for Canada? I know it's been a real challenge here to try and get a good comparison and say like, okay, who should be making the WTC team for Canada? I mean, it's a big place. We don't normally all play each other. And now there's the question like, well, we could be doing a war table tournament, and all of a sudden you can be doing these things where the East Coast is playing against the West Coast. Do you see any future where war tables used to better define who should be on the Canadian teams?
Absolutely. Why not use the tools you have available to you, right? If you can, the biggest issue to your point is that we're such a big country. We never get to see our other metas, the East Coast meta and, the central meta that kind of you and I are in, and even the West Coast meta, like so different. We very rarely get to, see into any interaction between any of us, except actually when we go to the States for the most part. So why wouldn't we use those tools, right? Why wouldn't we get at least a handful of games in between people here and people in Toronto to see, okay, you say your meta is, so much better than us, but can we actually prove that? Is there a way that we can actually put that down on paper and see? I would say we would use those tools to accomplish that task.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really hoping that the VTC keeps on going, because I think that's a fantastic thing. Even if it's not going to replace the WTC, I think it's just a great opportunity. And then even if that doesn't happen, I mean, for Canada, we definitely need to jump on this and probably do a couple of Canada-wide events just so we can give ourselves a little bit more data and realize, like, can Malorian beat a Marc-Andre LeBlanc? By the way, it's no.
Yeah, there are very few people who can beat Mal.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say you should be shamed about that, but yeah, and I mean we just ran a Canadian-wide war table tournament. I'd love to see more things like that happen. Does it give any credence to your quote unquote resume for WTC next year? Of course it does, right? It's a different format, but it's still Warmachine. So why wouldn't you say, oh, I came first place in a NorCal tournament, and then I went over here and I came second place in this Canadian tournament. Oh, and then I went over here and got third place in this other war table tournament. Like, all of those are resume building pieces. So they should all put you into a spot for consideration for WTC or whatever else you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming to the close here, coming to an hour. Chris, did you have any final thoughts on the VTC or anything else around this?
Oh, my final thought is just, again, I had a blast playing. I had, so much fun with my team and with the teams I got to interact with. I hope everyone feels at least, somewhat similar to that. I think it was a great experience. And to all the people who ran it, to all of the people who judged, to all the people that had any part in participating in it, fantastic job. My hat's off to you. Like, I cannot wait for you to circle back and decide you want to do this again, because I'll be there next year for sure.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Well, that's going to be drawing to a close to episode 33 of Shoulda Boosted. Chris, thanks again for coming on. And you know what? You can't come on here and listen to Malorian talk about how he does these things, because I'm just not good enough. So we need guys like you here. So thanks again for coming on, for letting us know how things went. And to all of our viewers out there, thanks for listening. Of course, you can be catching us on our actual Facebook page, where hopefully Mark has updated and put on the last few ones. But otherwise, I guess we'll catch you later. Bye.